Welcome to another Smart QA Musings, which, as we all know, is a gentle flurry of interesting thoughts. Today's musing is inspired by one of the key practices that I have about high-vis, which I strongly believe in, that I use it not just in testing, in every facet of life that I do, and I'm sure you do too. And that practice is what I call focus, yet meander. And thoughts related to it, which has been inspired by very many books that I've read over the years, have kind of been, in some sense, meaningfully distilled, along with how AI harms or helps, as we conclude, in this Smart QA Musing, which is titled as Attention Beyond Busyness. B-I-S-B-U-S-Y-N-E-S-S. So we all know that we, as managers, as leads, as productive people, we focus. We believe focus is very important to getting things done. And in today's world, the antithesis of that is distraction, which today is very prevalent simply because of various channels, devices, things that you have to deal with, and therefore sometimes it's seen as focus is bad. Not focus or being distracted is bad. Let's look at that. That's the whole idea in terms of what it is and how it connects to what we do in testing and what it means in the context of AI today. How does it help or harm? So when you look at when we all do work, I'm quite sure there is sometimes a particular kind of tiredness. Not because you're working terribly hard. I'm sure we all work hard and therefore there is a sense of tiredness, but I'm not talking about that kind of a tiredness. It's not that exhaustion. It's the kind of thing that where we've been constantly in motion all day, but I'm not satisfied with what I've really done in some sense. I've done a lot of work, right? We had a full day, we had meetings, we had emails, we had decisions, we did quite a few things, but somewhere that energy is missing. I'm just being busy. I'm sure each of us in some time have felt, simply because that's not about working hard, but not really mentally stopping, because it's an attention spent, but nothing seems to be made out of it. There is, a shift. It seems like there is some kind of a residue, right? Attention is not just being tired. So, in one of the books that I read, it talks about where the psychologist says, who has spent decades studying people, he says, what is the meaning of being alive? And I'm sure we all appreciate that. Alive is in the quality of the experience that we have about an activity, not in the outcomes that we produce, outputs that we produce. It is really how much of attention is invested in the activity that we do, not in the quantity of production, not in how efficiently we manage alone. And therefore we're really talking about the notion of quality of attention, how that significantly matters to the productivity of what we do and the energy that we have at the end of a hard day, right? And that's really what I'm talking about here, to set the context, right? So it is really the quality of the attention that we pay. But in real life, I guess, it is busyness. We are trained in some sense to make use of our time, be able to spend it wisely, efficiently, and so on. And busyness is not really about the destruction of attention. Busyness is not about saying, hey, I destroy the attention. It's not an argument against business where I'm saying, busyness is bad or good. It's the fact that busyness implies that I am sharpening in a unidimensional fashion. And when I'm very unidimensional, it's kind of interesting. Is it a form of incompetence? Or put it slightly, the act of busyness is competence, isn't it? Because we're very, very focused. We're very goal-directed motion. We are always focusing on tasks. We are always focusing on closures. We switch very many tasks. And quite obviously in the organizational context, we are rewarded for that. Because we think that's mastery, to be able to have extreme focus. Which is very beautifully put in this book called Deep Work by Cal Newport, which is where some of the ideas, some of the content is connected with. Now, in the current world, we are obviously very deeply, focused on ensuring that this connection to depth and work and focus is there. But the thing is focus about extreme execution? So if I wander, should I avoid it and come back? Right? And that's what we most often do. But let's look at the assumption beneath it. There is an attention, however uninvited, that we do possibly wander off. But what if that wandering is a signal to something else? A drift of a signal of something your directed attention isn't capable of looking. Right? That's not negative, isn't it? It's an attention that kind of lingers, that drifts, follows the signals. Right? So when the attention can't properly focus or organize on what is receiving, when information enters the consciousness but never finds a particular order, that's a bit of like entropy. I think there is a name for it, is what I understand. It's called psychic entropy. It's not the chaos in the dramatic sense. It's just a disorder. And therefore we become excellent in terms of focus. But what happens here is we probably have learned to have an excellent focus on execution. But in the contrary, it's like that knife. We might be losing the focus on exploration. It's like these two lines and we are right in the center and that's all we see. We just within those two lines. Is it good? Yes, it is. Because we are extreme focus. But are there signals, are there things that are outside which are interesting, which capture the attention, which might be useful? Maybe not if I'm extreme focus. And that's the second line, right? So we become excellent at focus as execution. But we may be losing focus as exploration, which I'm quite sure we all appreciate in the context of work that we do in testing, assurance, software engineering at large, is a very important quality. And in fact, both of them are. And therefore, let's now jump on to the second part of the stuff, which is like saying, what is meander? We talked a bit about the focus, if you will, probably in some sense inspired by one of the books on Deep Work by Cal Newport. Now let's look at what meander could possibly be. Is meander absence of focus? Not really. It's like the picture that you see here, a potter's wheel. It's like gently holding the clay that is being shaped loosely. Not tightly, isn't it? And that's the focus. The focus is about learning to hold loosely, so to speak, right? So meander is not something that's like, it's a luxury. I'm so busy, I can't afford to stray. That's not what I'm meaning. It's not the absence of focus. It is the ability to hold something loosely, so that the attention stays with something long enough to encounter, but it didn't expect. When possibly the notion of hypothesis or hypothesis of anything meets resistance, and instead of doubling down or discarding, the thinker follows that friction and uses it to the advantage, isn't it? Because truly speaking, one of the interesting books by Doug Hall, which is titled Jumpstart Your Business Brain, he talks about the fact, which is a book on innovation, if you will, at an organizational or team level, which I'm sure we resonate with, is that we don't really create something or innovate something by just sitting alone in a room. There is value when we have multiple minds in a room and each one of them probably telling us something interesting, which we call probably brainstorming, isn't it? So when multiple minds are exposed to a stimuli, and we are all exposed to stimuli from multiple minds, we probably benefit. And in a way, each one of them is throwing an interesting dart, and consider it. That's probably what meandering is. It doesn't happen just in a focused empty room alone. Right? When attention browses, reacts, makes associations, something interesting happens. And it's just to serve. I want to just point out that meander is not absence of focus. It's not the polar opposite, isn't it? And therefore, see this picture here. A big river. It has a direction. It ultimately flows into the ocean or the sea. It doesn't go straight. It meanders. Right? So it is focused on going to the sea, but the path it takes is not necessarily one straight line. And it seems to enjoy it. It seems to flow, so to speak, to use a metaphorical term called flow in what we do. And that's what it is. But it never loses the direction. Let's think about it slightly differently. What if it was not a river, but it was a canal, a human-built canal? Efficient, very engineered. It's very focused on getting water from one place to another place. Most often canals is water. Designed for throughput. But it cannot respond to a terrain that it didn't anticipate. Something happened, it may not be able to do. It may not meander and cut through. Right? So what is the takeaway from this? It's modern work, in some sense, has become a bit of canal-like. We're focused. But what we also need to know is it's about being a river. And as we go further up, I will connect this to the Taoist philosophy, which is about flow like a river. Right? So, river is a very interesting metaphor that I thought I'll bring in here to kind of illustrate the idea of meandering, but not yet losing focus. Let's talk about a story. It's a story about a cook. Though I didn't show the cook here as a part of the picture. And the story about the cook is the blade that he used to cut stuff. Maybe the meat, maybe the vegetables, maybe whatever. It never dulled. And he has apparently been cutting it using the knife for many, many years, couple of decades. And the blade was still as sharp as the day it was ground. And then so when somebody asks, how is it that you never blunt the knife? And the cook said he never looked at the cutting and looked at it with the eyes and then therefore cut. What do you mean by that? It simply means that he had a perception and understanding. He could actually see all those tiny little joints. His blade found the spaces between the joints because he had mapped them, because he was so supremely connected to the job. So supreme focus and supreme responsiveness, and yet being alive, so he didn't have to pressurize the blade. And this is the interesting part, right? So we are using the analogy of a blade to say we are not focused on the cutting by using the blade and seeing with the eyes, but the ability to be able to respond to that situation, seeing the unseen, and therefore seeing the perception, and watching all the unknowns by kind of cutting through and finding those spaces. And therefore the meander is not the opposite of deep work. It is what deep work looks before the problem has declared itself, how unknowns the surface. Right? It's the difference between the standard notion of a test case and the question that we have. It pops up when you look at something interesting, when you meander a little bit. So we talked about a little bit of a focus. We saw probably what was meander. Now, why did it disappear? What happened? We seem to appreciate that there is value in focus. We seem to probably also discern that there is value in meandering. But why sometimes it disappears? What could be some reasons? Well, it's because most of the time the environments that we live in, it rewards visible progress. As you can see, ion filings get attracted and they form a fantastic clean flow, and you can see it's all very focused, right? So the environments, be it the company, be it the team, be it the business, etc., we want certain degree of focus because that's what we can see. We can see something what we can visually see. Maybe documents, maybe test cases, maybe scripts, maybe, deliverables or features, so they reward visible progress, sometimes penalize ambiguity, and therefore force the thinking, compress the thinking into deliverables. And in a way, therefore, maybe treating the idea of exploration as a bit of a luxury, right? So the environment is possibly one important causative agent that happens, and therefore we quietly, even though we appreciate it, and we slowly sometimes drop it because there is a certain pressure. And we know that in some sense cuts off what you might call as creative thinking. But it's not about laziness here, right? It's just that quiet pause where you observe very many things which you can't see, where you see either problems or interesting ideas and so on. So the environment makes it sometimes a bit of unsafe. So what do we lose in the entire process? It's like this, right? I'm sure we all know these. We see more test cases, but we don't sometimes see real questions. We probably see sometimes more coverage, but we don't seem to have a greater understanding. We do a lot of activities, but still apparently the product is sometimes brittle. Why? Because sometimes when we meander, when the meandering is absent and extreme focus is there, certain things simply stop happening. And therefore some of the mental models that we would want to have probably are shallow because we don't want to explore, or we are not courageous enough to explore, right? And therefore one of the, Mihaly in his book on flow, he talked about the notion of optimal experience. And he said that's the notion of flow, right? And he said that the growth of a self requires complexity. What do you mean by that? The capacity to reorganize when attention encounters something that doesn't fit. So, becoming just more efficient is not really growth alone. It is about encountering different complexities, and obviously we figure out something along the way in terms of either solving or understanding more about the problem is what real growth is. And when that happens, I guess we become good at it. And that's what probably gives us some joy and energy. And therefore we certainly are more productive and less brittle, right? And that's what, then the classic book from Mihaly and Flow, written many years ago, talked about, which I'm quite sure resonates with the topic that the statement that is up there on the screen in terms of more of the visible artifacts and probably less of the invisible pieces, and therefore not still very wonderful activity. So we might turn out to be excellent executors. Now again, it is not about saying I'm favoring one over the other. It's about that enormously interesting balance that is the hardest part that we are probably mulling about. Right? So certainly meandering is not inefficiency. It's probably one of the most important things to do. Now, having kind of, mulled over this, mused over both the focus and the meander and tried to connect with some interesting parallels from certain interesting literature, let's take a look at what it could possibly be in this newer age of AI and systems that we have. And we have got the most powerful technology which shapes our attention or not, which we currently call as AI today, right? So today we can ask a question, get an answer. We can do anything fairly quickly, reasonably today. And I'm sure you must have seen the interesting news which was in paper today in the business section, which talked about the fact that the announcement by Anthropic and Claude Cowork actually busted the market, Indian stock market of services companies by quite a few percentage points, simply because it seemed to look like certain kinds of work possibly the services companies apparently do, possibly is threatened by the AI announcement from Anthropic. And that we know, right? We can answer a question. You can ask it a question like, say, hey, generate 50 test cases, and poof, it'll do that. It'll probably say, write a piece of code to do this. It probably does that. It says, summarize a report. It probably does that. It says, draft a strategy, produce a report. It can does all that. It's extremely focused in terms of what it can do, right? It's probably one of the most strongest attention shaping technology that we have. But is it? Is it only to be used in that fashion? To be able to do specific tasks significantly, maybe well, and certainly efficiently, right? And that's how we see it. But is it? And let's now go back to the canal analogy. Asking that specific question with this new tech is like this: ask, extract, deliver. It's like a canal, straight, focused, perfect, right? A closed loop question to an intelligent system. So it extracts, it delivers. You loop is fast, clean, efficient. If I take the river analogy, I go to the same system and then say, hey, let's connect these interesting ideas. Let's explore this path. Let's hypothesize about something. So I'm working with the tool probably as some kind of a co-worker. So that I'm using words like explore, follows. And therefore it's like a river. It gets wider. It's not narrowing anymore, isn't it? And that's an interesting shift. With the same tool, I can be extraordinarily focused like a canal. I can be extraordinarily broad like a river. Choice is yours. When would you want to exploit the tool? You can follow a wild tangent and explore and figure out and use it to the work that you're currently doing. The interesting thing, the cost of exploration is probably very less, close to zero, because you are just asking, leading, asking it to suggest, and so on. And by the way, maybe I don't have any more fear, because I'm just dealing with the system. And therefore, in some sense, there is the fear that I originally had, maybe not there when I deal with it. And I'm sure, therefore, you have heard on a slightly different note that there is a lot of an interesting usage of people who are possibly, let's say, not in their best of their moods, maybe sometimes depressed, resort to some of these AI systems to talk to it in a way, making it look like as if it's a counselor. Interesting though, that means they're exploring ideas, isn't it? So is the AI a canal or AI a river? Is it a faster tool or is it a different environment thinking? You pick. It's not that the machine is thinking for you. It is just that it's creating conditions to hold your attention. It is creating various paths that you can hold on to and various connects that you can hold on to. And that's the power, probably what we have today. So in some sense, the tool that we have today is an amazing amplifier. An amplifier to hold the quality of attention, to be able to explore various different paths. And that's what it does, right? So you decide whether you want the canal attention, you want the river attention. So if you're extremely focused, say, hey, here is some content, look at it, parse this way, produce this way, and so on. That's brilliant. It amplifies the speed because it's extreme focus. If it's a river attention, help me think about this. What am I not seeing? Let's explore. Let's connect. What does it mean? What could be potential hypothesis? Is this possibly true? You get a river. You amplify the breadth. Right? And therefore so is it good? Is it bad? Choice is yours, right? You can choose whichever you want. It's about how you want to make AI visible for yours. So, to stay with the question that we talked about is it focus, is it meander, and so on and so forth. It's really about this musing itself isn't been about a particular method. It's not. It is just about noticing something about the kind of attention that we bring to the work and what happens when attention is shaped only by the motion. right? We are deeply engaged in the activity, but not, seeing the others. We are effortful, but we are not striving, and therefore end up sometimes being tired, right? But what do we want? What would we like? Probably like the swimmer, right? Immersed, focused, light, observant, responsive, supreme activity meeting supreme relaxation. And I'm sure if you're a swimmer, you understand that, it takes enormous amount of relaxation for you to float and for you to generate with power, for you to move forward, and certainly for you to enjoy the swim, right? And that's, I think this is the oldest tradition of the Taoism, which talks about, maximum power comes from supreme relaxation, Taoist philosophy, right? Which is where we started off when we talked about the notion of a river. So, where you act through something, but that feels like less like will and more like a responsiveness. So when you go back and think about the first statement that we started off with in saying the kind of tiredness, maybe not there. And I think that's why we get into a supreme notion of flow, and that's when I think we produce the best, right? So the focus at Meander, so to speak, is not a productivity technique. It is a way of being present to your own thinking, to hold the question steady and also to let it drift, right? The deepest form of maybe professional attention that we want, right? The oldest form of intelligence that we all want. So, in closing, what would it take to let yourself meander and still trust that you're working? This is just a question that we all ask ourselves. There is no answer to it. So I'm just leaving it as a question to you. Thank you so much. I hope you found this interesting. A simple concept of focus at meander, probably one of the hardest that to practice. Thank you, and